The sun streams through the stained glass window on a historic home at the University of Alberta and casts a warm glow over the main room. As you slip into your flowing white dress, the delicate rustling of fabric drowns out the distant sounds of wedding guests gathering below. Your heart is racing with excitement and anticipation, your stomach in knots. Your sister puts the final touches on your hair with one of the brushes she has laid out on the antique table, and then leaves as the bridal party is gathering below. You're alone for the first time all day, and take a breath, then follow her out. The procession has started, and once again you're by yourself on the main floor. Everyone else has taken their seats. Then, you hear it. It sounds like someone is dragging furniture and is coming from the room you were just in. You race up the stairs, worried about the cost you'll incur if someone was careless with the antiques in the room. When you get there, an icy chill courses through you when you notice the hairbrushes have somehow been moved across the room to the bedside table. You look around, but there's nobody there. The hallway is empty and silent. Shaking off the nerves, you walk to the mirror for one last look as your sister calls out to you from downstairs. But then, in the mirror behind you, you see a young boy in the reflection. His curious gaze piercing directly at you. He smiles and then vanishes. You spin around only to find yourself alone again. I'm Nadine Bailey, and this is Haunted Canada. Join me as we visit the home of Alberta's first premier. This is the story of the Rutherford House. Rutherford House is located on the University of Alberta campus, overlooking the North Saskatchewan River. Alexander Cameron Rutherford was born in Osgood, Carleton County, Ontario, on February 2, 1857. His parents immigrated to Canada from Aberfeldy, Scotland, just a few years earlier in 1855. Not much is written about his childhood, other than he went to a public school, eventually attended Woodstock College, and later became a teacher. It turned out to be a short stint. After 1 year of teaching, higher learning called him once more, and he left for Montreal, where he enrolled in McGill University. He graduated in 1881 with a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Civil Law, and joined the Ottawa law firm of Scott, McTavish, and McCracken, where for 4 years he was mentored by Richard William Scott. Scott had been appointed as Senator for Ottawa in 1874 by Alexander Mackenzie and remained in office until 1913. During this time, Alexander Cameron Rutherford was under his tutelage. He was called to the Ontario Bar in 1885. He became a junior partner in the firm of Hodgkins, Kidd, and Rutherford, which had offices in Ottawa and Kemptville, and he became responsible for the Kemptville location. He moved to the Eastern Ontario community, where his social circle grew to include William Cameron Edwards, a businessman and parliamentarian. Through him, he was introduced to the Burkitt family, which included former Member of Parliament Thomas Burkitt. And although practicing law and establishing a money-lending business were demanding, he still had time for romance. Rutherford was introduced to Burkitt's niece, Maddie Burkitt. The two fell in love and married by 1888, and 2 years later, the couple welcomed their first of 3 children, Cecil in 1890, followed by Hazel 3 years later in 1893. A year after Hazel was born, Rutherford took his second trip west. He took the Canadian Pacific Railway across the prairies, and upon his arrival in South Edmonton, he was immediately excited by its potential. He was also pleased to find that the dry air relieved his bronchitis. Rutherford decided right then and there he would relocate, and a year later, he brought his reluctant wife and 2 children. They arrived in Edmonton by train on June 10, 1895. Just 10 days after their arrival, Rutherford's law office was up and running. He had also purchased 4 lots of land and contracted local builder Hugh McCurdy to build him a house. A month later, in July, the family moved into their new 4-room, single-story house. He quickly became one of the city's leading lawyers and prominent businessmen, and a year later, he became the town's only lawyer when his competition, Merv Mackenzie, moved to Toronto. By 1896, Rutherford was deeply involved in the community, and as someone who was mentored by prestigious Canadian politicians, he also had political intentions. Within 3 years of being in Alberta, he had become Secretary-Treasurer of the South Edmonton School Board, Vice President of the South Edmonton Library Institute, Auditor of the South Edmonton Agricultural Society, and became involved in the provincial autonomy movement for the Northwest Territories. When South Edmonton became incorporated into the town of Strathcona in 1899, he became the town's new Secretary-Treasurer and acted as returning officer in its first election and served until 1905. After 2 defeats, he was elected to the Northwest Territories Assembly in 1902 and served until 1905, during which time he was Deputy Speaker. However, as his political star rose, tragedy struck. Rutherford and his wife had welcomed their 3rd child, Marjorie, in 1903, but sadly, she died 16 months later. Throughout all of this, Rutherford continued to practice law. He employed single women as secretaries in an era that clerical workers were predominantly male, and he defended a First Nations person accused of murder when most lawyers refused such cases. Besides his law practice, Rutherford was a successful real estate investor, and he also owned an interest in gold mining equipment on the North Saskatchewan River. All of this made him a pillar of the community, and residents rallied around him during elections as his political career got off the ground. By February 1905, the federal government of Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier introduced legislation to create 2 new provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, out of part of the Northwest Territories. This led to the 1905 Alberta general election. It would be the first general election held in the province of Alberta shortly after the province entered Canadian Confederation on September 1, 1905. On November 9, 1905, 25 members were elected to the first Alberta Legislative Assembly. The Alberta Liberal Party, led by Rutherford, received a majority of the votes and took 23 of the 25 seats in the new legislature, defeating the Conservative Party. Rutherford became Alberta's first premier and held a few other portfolios. He was provincial treasurer and was Minister of Education. In 1906, he introduced a bill that founded the University of Alberta. By 1909, Rutherford was looking to build a home befitting his position as premier, and on May 29th of that year, he purchased a 1.3-acre triangle parcel of land overlooking the North Saskatchewan River. On the sale deed, Rutherford was described as a gentleman of Strathcona. Coincidentally enough, Rutherford had approved the same area for the University of Alberta campus, literally behind his own house. About a year later, just as the foundation of Rutherford's new home was being poured, his Liberal Party was crumbling under dissent. When the legislature met for the first time after the 1909 election, things seemed to be going well for Rutherford's government. He controlled a huge majority and enjoyed widespread popularity after his government had achieved significant success in setting up a new province. But just a few months later, cracks began to appear as Liberal backbencher John R. Boyle began to ask questions about the agreement between the government and the Alberta and Great West Waterways Railway Company. This would become a major political scandal as Rutherford was accused of opening the provincial's financial credit to abuse and failing to protect Alberta's interests. The scandal split the Liberal Party. Rutherford's Minister of Public Works, William Henry Cushing, resigned from the government and publicly attacked its railway policy. A large portion of the Liberal caucus voted to defeat the government in the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. Rutherford's government survived all of these votes, but pressure from Lieutenant Governor George Bouillier and the general unrest within his own caucus forced him to resign on May 26, 1910. And although he never held the office of Premier again, Rutherford remained as a member of the legislature until the 1913 election. A royal commission later cleared him of any intentional wrongdoing. However, the damage had been done. A black cloud would hang over him for many years to come. Shortly after his electoral defeat, Rutherford was made King's Counsel, and through all of the political upheaval, he sought refuge in the new family home. Construction began in October 1909, just as his government began to crumble. The family moved into the elegant three-story Edwardian-style home, which cost $9,500 to build in February 1911. Rutherford named the new home Achnacarry, after the Camerons' ancestral home in Scotland. The home had many modern features, including hot running water, electric lights, flushing toilets, and telephones, all of which were a luxury at the time. Today, it's a provincial historic site, a museum. It is one of Edmonton's most historic landmarks, rich in history and Victorian charm. Located in the heart of the city, just south of White Avenue, the house serves as a tribute to the early 20th century architecture and a glimpse into Edmonton's past. Visitors are first greeted by beautifully landscaped grounds with mature trees, flower beds, and a well-maintained lawn. The house is set in an attractive urban park with walking paths and shaded areas, making it a peaceful spot amidst the bustling city. The garden is designed with careful attention to detail in how the plants, shrubs, and flowers are arranged. And along with the home, they are a prime example of Edwardian classical architecture and design, a style that was popular in the early 20th century. The building is 3 stories tall, built from brick and stucco, and the roof is steeply pitched with wide eaves. The front facade is balanced and symmetrical, featuring large windows with decorative sashes, and is anchored by a central porch, with a roof supported by columns that leads visitors up to the grand door with intricate woodwork and original hardware. Upon entering the home, visitors are greeted by a grand foyer, which is particularly welcoming during the Alberta's cold winters. It has high ceilings and dark wood paneling, which blends elegance with comfort. A beautifully curved wooden staircase leads to the upstairs reception area and landing, which is partially lit by a stained glass skylight. But on the main floor to the left is a library with wooden panels and a central fireplace. Above the fireplace is an impressive portrait of Alexander Cameron Rutherford, wearing a dark suit, small round glasses, and a distinguished gray mustache. The fireplace today houses an electric heater to keep the books dry. 8,000 books from Rutherford's collection helped build the Rutherford Library at the university. He would often allow students to borrow some of his personal books. When the students opened them to read, they would often find money Rutherford had hidden inside for them. Students would often try to return the money, but he would always refuse them. Behind the library is a large dining room with a bay window, and behind that is a kitchen set up as it would have been when the Rutherfords lived there. To the right of the main hall is a living room, which is filled with family photos and is painted in a warm sunny yellow with a delicate antique Chesterfield and chairs. Behind the living room is a small sitting room referred to as a den with an open fireplace, and behind that is a small breakfast room with an attached porch, which has been converted into a sunroom. Upstairs, the bedrooms provide a glimpse into the personal, private spaces of the family. Towards the front of the house, visitors will find the primary bedroom where Mr. and Mrs. Rutherford slept. It has a beautiful bed with an antique headboard adorned with bedding and embroidered curtains, as well as 2 chests of drawers. One of them has beautiful antique brushes and combs with an antique mirror and a small washstand. Then there are 2 children's rooms, which are simpler, with beds dressed in colorful quilts and patterned blankets, and furnished with small wooden chairs and desks. There's also a sewing room. Although the beautiful home and gardens are today a well-maintained museum, it wasn't always. When Maddie died on September 13, 1940, Rutherford decided to sell the home and most of the furnishings to the Delta Epsilon fraternity. He moved in with his son Cecil and continued as Chancellor of the University of Alberta until his death less than a year later on June 12, 1941, just 3 weeks after presiding over his last convocation. He was buried in the family plot alongside his wife at Mount Pleasant Cemetery. The home housed 20 to 25 Delta Epsilon fraternity members per year until 1969, including future Premier Peter Lougheed and some future cabinet members. During that time, they modernized the kitchen, added showers in the basement, and partitioned rooms. And, like most fraternities, partied and drank in the house. By 1961, the house was in disrepair, and the university planned to tear it down. A public campaign was launched to save the house instead, and in 1970, it was successful. After a lengthy restoration plan, the house opened as a museum on June 10, 1973. By then, the house had been returned to its former glory. It was filled with antique furnishings and items donated by the Rutherford family or purchased to show how the home would have looked over 100 years ago. I first unearthed the stories surrounding the Rutherford House when I began operating the University of Alberta Ghost Tours. Many of the encounters I'm sharing with you today were told to me firsthand by current and former employees, volunteers, and board members. Almost from the second I started, I heard people say that they were scared by the sounds of doors opening and slamming shut. They told me that when they were alone in the house, or when the house was otherwise silent, they heard the sewing machine operating on the second floor. They shared that they couldn't escape the feeling of someone following them, particularly in the library. All of these stories ended the same. When the person went to investigate the sound or when they turned around to see who was behind them, there would be nobody there. One of the more curious phenomena reported is the distinct sweet scent of roses that lingers in the house, especially in the dining room. Some believe this could be linked to Maddie Rutherford's love of flowers, as roses were a significant part of her life. She's also connected to another room that has the most paranormal activity, the Rutherford's primary bedroom on the second floor. Staff told me that on many occasions they'd be alone in the house and have heard the sound of someone dragging furniture across the room. When they rushed to investigate, the room was always empty. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't evidence that something had been there. Those who shared these experiences said that they would hear noises, run to the room, and would find it empty. But there were times that when they ran to the room, one item, an antique hairbrush, had moved. An employee told me over 15 years ago that Mrs. Rutherford loved to brush her hair every evening. She often kept her antique brushes and combs on the table next to the bed where she slept. When staff heard sounds in the bedroom, they would often find the brushes and the combs, which were usually found on the bureau, were now moved to the table next to the bed. Because of this, many people believe that Mrs. Rutherford is making sure her brushes and combs are returned to the spot where she kept them, that she has remained to look after her home. And she might not be the only one. On other occasions, staff working during the day have heard a child running on the second floor. When they investigate, they have seen out of the corner of their eye a young boy, aged 7 or 8, running from room to room. When they follow him and check every room, every nook and cranny, no child is ever found. Those who have experienced this paranormal phenomenon have also shared that as they're getting ready to close up for the day, that they'll hear the sound of a ball bouncing down the grand staircase. It then lands in the front foyer, and when they go to look, the sound always stops and no ball is ever found. As I tell people on my University of Alberta Ghost Tours, no child has ever died in the house. So, is there a spirit of a little boy? And if so, where did he come from? Well, about 15 years ago, I brought in a local psychic to travel from room to room, giving readings. When this psychic reached the room decorated for a little boy, she said that she felt his presence. But he wasn't attached to the home, but instead a piece of antique furniture in the bedroom. She believed that the boy's spirit entered the house when the furniture was brought in the early 1970s. The psychic shared with me that she believed that the little boy, referred to as being friendly but a little mischievous, and that he liked to make his presence known. Perhaps the earliest manifestations tied to the Rutherford House involves the sensation of being touched by invisible hands. Several guests and staff members have recounted stories of feeling as if someone brushed past them or even touched their shoulders, only to turn around and find no one there. They have felt a lingering sensation as if someone is trying to get their attention and have felt light pressure on the back, leaving them unsettled. A few reports describe the feeling of a slight push, as though someone is guiding or nudging you, particularly when standing near the entrance hall or near the staircase. So keep that in mind when you visit the Rutherford House, because it has been well documented as a place filled with ghosts and paranormal activity that keeps everyone on their toes. The house is a place where time seems to stand still, and perhaps it's the lingering energy of those who once lived there that keep the history and the legacy of the Rutherford family alive. Thank you for joining me as we explore the haunted Rutherford House in Edmonton, Alberta. Haunted Canada is sponsored by the Edmonton Ghost Tours. I will link it in the show notes. Haunted Canada is written and produced by me, Nadine Bailey, with senior producer Dila Velasquez. Production and sound design is by Rob Johnston, with help from Roslyn Kufer. If you would like to support this podcast, please follow and share. And if you can give us a like and a 5-star written review, that is always appreciated. Also, you can follow me on our different social media platforms, or if you have a ghost story, haunting, or true crime that you would like for us to cover on this podcast, please email me through the website hauntedcanada.com. Also, check out my YouTube channel, Haunted Canada. Thank you from all of us at Haunted Canada and Curious Cast. Have a good night, everyone, and stay haunted.